It was a moment when two ideas about how it might be possible to run the world without politics first took hold. In 1975, New York City was on the verge of collapse. For 30 years, the politicians who ran the city had borrowed more and more money from the banks to pay for its growing services and welfare. But in the early 70s, the middle classes fled from the city, and the taxes they paid disappeared with them. So the banks lent the city even more. But then they began to get worried about the size of the growing debt, and whether the city would ever be able to pay it back. And then one day in 1975, the banks just stopped. The city held its regular meeting to issue bonds in return for the loans, overseen by the city's financial controller.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today, the City of New York is offering for competitive bidding sale 260 million tax anticipation notes, of which 100 million will mature on June 3rd, 1975.
The banks were supposed to turn up at 11 a.m. But it soon became clear that none of them were going to appear. The meeting was rescheduled for 2 p.m, and the banks promised they would turn up.
The announcement on behalf of the controller is that the offer, which we had expected to receive and announce at 2 o'clock this afternoon, is now expected at 4 o'clock.
Well, does this mean that so far nobody wants those bonds?
We will be making a further announcement at 4 o'clock, and anything further that I could say now I think would not advance the interests of the sale, which is now in progress.
Does this mean that you have not been able to sell them so far today?
We will have a further announcement at 4 o'clock.
What happened that day in New York marked a radical shift in power. The banks insisted that in order to protect their loans, they should be allowed to take control of the city. The city appealed to the president, but he refused to help. So a new committee was set up to manage the city's finances. Out of 9 members, 8 of them were bankers. It was the start of an extraordinary experiment where the financial institutions took power away from the politicians and started to run society themselves. The city had no other option. The bankers enforced what was called austerity on the city, insisting that thousands of teachers, policemen and firemen were sacked. This was a new kind of politics. The old politicians believed that crises were solved through negotiations and deals. The bankers had a completely different view. They were just the representatives of something that couldn't be negotiated with, the logic of the market. To them, there was no alternative to this system. It should run society.
Just by shifting paper around, these slobs can make $60–65 million in a single transaction. That would take care of all of the layoffs in the city. So it's reckless, it's cruel, and it's a disgrace.
There'd be a fair number of bankers, of course, who'd say, well, it's the unions who have been too greedy. Now, what would your reaction be to that?
I guess they're right in a way. If you can make $60 million on a single transaction and a worker makes $8–9,000 a year,